"Is there going to be food in this house today or not?" The father of the household inquired loudly and indignantly. "Honey, but we just had dinner." Kate looked at her husband in surprise as he sat in front of the empty plate, spoon in hand, and looked at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner and was determined not to understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. "So it was dinner?" Sergio asked mockingly. "And I thought there should be some meat in dinner, at least in a man's dinner. You can do with a cabbage leaf for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm the one who works and brings money into the family." And, as it seemed to me, I had the right to count on normal food for that money. Bit her lip. She realized, belatedly, that the old story was beginning again. The same old story that repeated itself every time the month came to an end. Each time her husband approached this conversation differently from the last. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. She didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more. She had heard all of Sergio's arguments many times before and had answered them many times with her own, but the couple had never been able to come to an agreement. Knew Kate was sure of it. Neither of them had come up with anything new, which meant that the continuation of this conversation would be as pointless as before. Nevertheless, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't an option either. She had tried this tactic 2 or 3 times before, and it had not worked for her. "Sergio," Kate began gently, "we have discussed this many times. Should we start this again?" "It's worth it," her husband interrupted her firmly. "We're going to have this conversation until things change. Or, to be more precise, until you get your act together and get a job. I can't keep dragging you all around my neck forever, after all." Kate splashed her hands. "Honey, how can I go to work? They won't take the younger ones to daycare. There's no room anywhere yet. We won't have enough money for a nanny even if I get a job somewhere. But others somehow manage without any nannies. So others have grandparents, sisters and brothers, someone else. But we have no one. I'm an orphan, and your parents won't even take care of the kids for half a day so I can get a part-time job. Don't put this on my parents again. They raise their own kids and they don't have to take care of yours." Kate froze in place, even stopping to wash the dishes, which she had begun to do during this awkward conversation. The word alone hurt her, as if her husband had hit her. She was not sure, however, that a physical blow would not have come out less painful. "What do you mean with mine?" she exclaimed. "These are ours." "What do you mean with mine?" she exclaimed. "They are our children. You wanted them as much as I did, didn't you?" Sergio smirked in a very wicked way. "I wanted to, but I didn't want to," he said. "We didn't agree that I would have to carry the whole lot on my back. I thought that you would sit on maternity leave for a while, and then, like all normal people, go back to work. And since you're a housewife now, the children are your responsibility, and I have nothing to do with them." Kate felt as if someone was squeezing her throat with strong fingers. These statements were something new. Sergio had never made such statements before. Yes, he complained that he had to feed his family alone. Yes, he had lamented that on his salary, which, to put it bluntly, was not particularly large, his wife could not provide him with what he thought he needed. But he had never yet claimed that their shared children had nothing to do with him. Sergio, on the other hand, as if reading her thoughts and certainly seeing her condition perfectly well, decided, it seems, to finally finish his wife off. "And as for the younger ones, with which you so actively covering your laziness," he said, "so I'm not sure that it is from me. I worked all day while you were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have been visiting you during that time." Of course, Kate couldn't bear such unfair accusations any longer. Choking with tears, practically unable to see the way, she rushed out of the kitchen and, not realizing how it happened, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Alex was looking after his younger brother and sister and looked up at her in surprise. "Mom?" he asked in an unusually serious tone for his age. "What happened?" "Nothing, son. Everything is fine." Kate, belatedly realizing her mistake, tried to discreetly wipe away her tears. The boy looked at her carefully, then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he decided that his mother didn't want to disturb the little ones, which was why she was trying to pretend that everything was fine. Kate didn't bother to dissuade him, but just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day Alex would have more important things to do, and he wouldn't remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to go with her grief. There were only 2 rooms in their apartment, a child's room and an adult's room. And in the second one, her husband could come at any moment. She didn't want to see him right now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up his favorite subject so easily and would continue to drive her with his remarks. There was only one way out to leave the apartment, despite the late hour. Of course, leaving the children virtually alone was not the best solution. On the other hand, in such a state, it would obviously not be able to interact with them normally. So whether there's a wall in the apartment or not doesn't really matter. The younger ones would be left in Alex's care anyway. At least Kate had no doubt that he would put them to bed properly, and he himself would go to bed on time. Her son, responsible beyond his years, loved to play with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to allow the children to stay alone for long. But when Lesha took to tutor the younger ones in her presence, she saw that he coped with them perfectly. Yes, she was definitely lucky to have a son, and at the moment that was the only consolation she had. She wandered aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the rain that had started, small and nasty. All her thoughts were centered on one single question: how she had reached such a life, how happy she was. Had her youthful love ended with her husband openly accusing her of infidelity without any reason? Kate remembers how they met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, to be a perfect couple. Their relationship was like a romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants, huge gorgeous bouquets of flowers. Both of them were waiting for a great future, and hardly anyone could imagine the poverty and doom in which these people found themselves now. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Sergio began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that? What is it?" he asked. "My income is enough for 2 people. You will stay at home, cook, clean, raise children, after all." At first, Kate flatly refused to even hear about it. Brought up in an orphanage, who had every chance to be at the very bottom of her life, she was incredibly diligent and somehow miraculously managed to break into decent society and now held on to this opportunity with all her might. However, in the end, Sergio managed to convince the girl that now this brave new world is not going anywhere from her anyway. And at first, everything was really good. Kate, as Sergio had planned, was doing household chores in their shared house while he was doing his business. They even had enough money in excess. Nevertheless, for some reason it did not work out to postpone. There were always some optional but pleasant things that I wanted to buy right now, and perhaps none of them thought then that any savings were needed. "If anything happens, my parents will help us," Sergio assured his young wife when she timidly started a conversation on this topic. You know, they don't live in poverty with me. Kate still didn't know if he believed what he was saying at the time or was lying to her, confident that that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while something happened to his business. Kate, without going into details, admitted only that over time he began to make less and less profit until eventually he completely collapsed. And at that moment it turned out that Sergio's parents were not going to provide any help to the young family. "Besides you, we also have younger children who have not yet got back on their feet. And you are already an adult man and you have to deal with your problems on your own," his father told him. Then they had to sell the luxurious large apartment in which they lived and move into a small 2-room apartment on the very outskirts of the city. Surprisingly, Alexander himself was most dissatisfied with this arrangement. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to drag out a rather miserable existence. Kate reacted to this with philosophical calmness. Of course, she also managed to wean herself from a poor life, but still, once the girl let it, and therefore she was more prepared for various difficulties and knew exactly what to do in such conditions. Pretty quickly, she found a job, got a job in a store as a saleswoman. The salary, of course, was modest, but it's still better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself anyway. Sergio chose a completely different way to solve problems. He went on a long-term binge. Kate didn't blame her husband for anything. Everything happens in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire, calm, and supportive. And, in the end, her efforts were successful. Sergio stopped drinking and started developing new business ideas that would allow their family to return to their former wealth and prosperity. However, there was always something wrong with these ideas. Even if it was possible to accumulate some initial amount and start a new business, all sorts of difficulties arose quite quickly, and the longer it all went on, the more unbearable the man's character became. "I don't have enough money to fully implement my projects," he told Kate frankly. "But what can I do, honey?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I work almost 7 days a week. I just have nowhere to take the time to earn even more. Of course, if I had graduated, it would have been much easier. But what is there to regret now? This situation should serve as a lesson for both of us. I still need to finish my studies and find a normal job. Besides, as I said, savings will be needed. But these are, of course, plans for the time when we get out of this. How are we going to get out?" Her husband was indignant. "You're not helping me with this at all, but I'm really doing everything I can," Kate replied in surprise. "No," her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There are some things you haven't done, even though I've repeatedly explained to you how important it is for me and for yourself. Honey, you seem to forget that although I did not receive a full education, I still studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolute madness. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me in matters where I do understand something? You just don't believe in me." Alexander replied in a frustrated voice. "You think that since I made a mistake once, now I will repeat them all the time, and nothing else will ever work out for me. After such statements, Kate, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he was deeply mistaken, and no one believed in him as much as she did. In the end, this conversation ended in nothing, only to start again the next day. Nevertheless, no matter how hard Alexander tried, Kate could not agree to his plan in any way. And he offered a very simple thing: to take out a large loan in her name in order to put this money into business. No bank wanted to lend money to him, who was bankrupt and officially unemployed, so he could not implement his idea without the help of his wife. Kate urged him to think about how exactly they would give this very loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that this was not the way to restore her former status, but into an even deeper pit. And fortunately, she did not succumb to any persuasion from her husband, and then she got pregnant. Sergio had to give up all his business ideas and get a job in order to be able to feed his family, which was soon to become even bigger. Of course, he was not happy about this prospect, but both spouses were still confident that this situation was temporary. Kate did not plan to stay on maternity leave for a long time and was going to go to work as soon as she placed her son in a nursery. But even this plan was not destined to come true. There were no places in kindergartens historically. And pretty soon Kate realized that there was nothing to dream about a nursery. It's also good if the cue comes in 3 or 4 years. And then it turned out that she got pregnant again. Just when Leosha turned 3 years old, she already gave birth to 2 children. That's when Sergio began to quietly talk about how it would be nice for her to return to work. She knew it herself. But how is this possible with 3 small children in your arms? Over time, the husband became more insistent, but the situation did not change in any way, which eventually resulted in that ugly conflict that occurred that ill-fated evening. That's what Kate was thinking about, wandering aimlessly in the dark of night through the streets of an area that had become almost her home for so many years. Fortunately, although he was on the outskirts of the city, he was considered quite prosperous. Any crimes were extremely rare here, so it was quite safe to move, even at such a late hour. However, this was the last thing the woman thought about. Suddenly, a certain oddity caught her attention. Kate, immersed in her sad thoughts and memories, did not even immediately understand what exactly alerted her. It's just that somewhere in her subconscious, a neon sign seemed to flash, informing her that something was wrong in the space around her. Emerging from her own thoughts, the woman looked around and quickly discovered the reason for her vague concern. It was a little girl, the same age as her Alex. In her elegant pink dress, she sat on the curb in proud solitude and looked at the asphalt under her feet. Kate raised his eyebrows in surprise. In her neighborhood, she had never met street children, beggars, or just wandering the streets, especially at such a time. Still, decent enough people lived here to let the children go alone at night. And at the same time, they are far from rich, so that beggars would be interested in this area. In addition, the girl did not look like a street child, or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She was wearing beautiful and clean, obviously new clothes, and she did not behave at all, as you would expect from little tramps. The whole situation surprised Kate extremely, but this surprise was unimportant, as if it were background. Her mind realized all these details much later, when she was once again replaying this strange meeting in her head. Right now, she was only interested in one thing: the child was outside at night, which meant he was in potential danger. It was necessary to give this girl all possible help. Guided by this very consideration, she carefully, so as not to scare, approached the baby and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were on the same level. Kate tried to speak quietly and affably. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "I do not know." The girl answered surprisingly calmly. "How is that?" Kate was surprised. "And that's it? I mean, I probably knew that once, but I forgot." "And who are your parents, and where are they?" "I don't know. I mean, I don't remember," the girl said. "Do you remember anything at all?" Kate asked cautiously. This time, the girl didn't say anything and just silently shook her head. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. "But how did you get here?" "I came," the girl replied. "From where?" "From there." The child waved his hand indifferently, indicating the direction. "What was there? Is it a forest or a park of some kind?" "Don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything anymore. I just went somewhere, and now I'm tired and decided to sit down." Kate shook her head in disbelief. She didn't like the whole situation at all, and she wasn't even close to imagining exactly what she should do about it. Finally, after being silent and thinking for a while, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, making it clear that apparently she had not eaten for a very long time. "Okay," Kate sighed wearily. "Come with me. I'll feed you and put you to bed. And in our apartment, with my children. In the morning we will think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'll call you Mary for now. Do you mind?" "No," the newly minted Mary replied very indifferently. Holding the girl tightly by the hand, Kate headed home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately flew out of her mind. That was the way she was built. If someone needed help, her own problems were pushed into the background for her. Especially for her, as a mother, this situation with a street child, who also could not even remember his own name, was unbearable. When they reached the apartment without incident, it was already about 2 a.m. All Kate's household, as she immediately saw, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was even stung by some vague resentment. After all, none of them seemed to care where exactly she was at such a late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Kate had no desire to explain to her children and her husband, especially her husband, where this girl came from and why she was in their apartment. She quietly went into the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the refrigerator, and fed the little wife. After eating, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Mary had not only not eaten for a long time, but also had not slept for a long time. Kate decided to make a bed for her right there on the couch, and she settled down side by side on the floor, and terribly exhausted during the day, fell asleep very quickly, forgetting even to turn on her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before anyone else in the house. After all, it was necessary to cook breakfast, get my husband to work, and my eldest son to school. Besides, she was the only one of the whole family who was a lark, and early ascents were not only familiar to her, but also pleasant. But of course, this did not apply to those cases when she had to stay up late. In such circumstances, it was extremely difficult to wake up without an alarm clock. Naturally, Kate overslept. and her awakening turned out to be not the most pleasant, because the woman woke up from the fact that someone was roughly shaking her by the shoulder. Opening her eyes, she saw Sergio's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast is not ready. You're still sleeping, and not in bed, but on the kitchen floor. And please explain to me, what kind of girl is snoring on our couch?" In the first few moments, Kate didn't even realize which girl he was talking to. Then she remembered her night adventures and tried to explain to Sergio what was what. He listened to her with a very skeptical expression on his face. Then he stated that when he returned home from work, Mary should no longer be in their house. After not having breakfast, he retired to work, leaving Kate to slowly come to her senses. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. Just a few minutes later, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to just wake Alex up, not to mention getting him ready for school, and for sure the child was sleeping peacefully in his crib. But if Sergio was already late for work, then it was high time for Alex to leave the house. For the first time this morning, Kate looked at her watch and clutched her head. My son's first lesson was supposed to start in 10 minutes. Waking Alex up, she hastily prepared a simple breakfast for him and sent him to class. Fortunately, it was not far to go to school, and the boy was quite able to cope with this road on his own. However, Kate understood that he would be late anyway, which means that he, and therefore she, would soon have problems related to this. However, Kate wasn't going to think about it right now, because she had other difficulties that required immediate action. Fortunately, all the commotion that had been going on in the house for the previous half hour did not disturb Mary's sound sleep. Her rescuer decided to wait for the girl to wake up on her own. In the meantime, take care of her own young children and think carefully about what exactly she should do. The girl got up only 2 hours later, and by this point, Kate has already developed a clear plan of action. It was just the right time for a walk with the kids, and she decided, taking Mary with her, to look into the nearest police station. After all, that's why law enforcement agencies exist, to deal with such cases. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" the person on duty in the department asked her. "That's right. And she can't even remember her name?" "That's right," Kate confirmed again. She did not understand the meaning of this procedure. Once the woman had already told the whole story, after which she outlined it again in a written statement. And now, reading her testimony, for some reason the police officer asks again about literally all the circumstances that she has already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police right away?" "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that I should do exactly that." Mary didn't seem to understand at all that it was about her, or she understood but didn't attach much importance to it. Instead, she looked with interest at the room they were in. Although, in Kate's opinion, there was nothing exciting or even just beautiful here, and there could not be. "And what are you planning to do with the child?" After a pause, the policeman asked. "What do you mean?" Kate was surprised. This question threw her into some shock before it was uttered. The woman sincerely believed that now the fate of the girl is the responsibility of law enforcement officers. Literally, the attendant replied indifferently, "We can put her in a special facility, or let him stay with you for now." Kate's eyes went dark. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband expressed himself quite clearly so that she would not be here by the evening, and she herself understood perfectly well that they simply could not afford another child. "I can barely cope with my own." It was all understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was the words special institution orphanage, and to allow this girl to get there was unthinkable. Kate perfectly remembered, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it was for her to live and grow up in an orphanage, how she had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of caregivers. For her, it was all in the past. She endured and overcame everything. But then she was born into a dysfunctional family, who lost even those parents that she had early. She has been used to difficulties since childhood. For her, such treatment was normal. Mary is a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that this was a homely, beloved, perhaps even slightly spoiled child. Besides with obvious mental trauma, since she did not remember her past or even her real name, it was absolutely obvious that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of an orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman did not have time to scroll through all these long and tedious reflections in her head, but undoubtedly they were the motivation for her decision. Looking into the eyes of the attendant, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." "That's fine," the policeman replied. He had clearly expected just such an answer, and upon receiving it, he suddenly opened up. "I'm from an orphanage myself, and I see that this girl clearly does not belong in such an institution." "That's what I thought," Kate replied rather coldly. "Generally speaking," he continued, not noticing her tone, "leaving her with you is not exactly according to the rules. But I will try to settle this issue." "Good," the woman replied. "Can we go now?" "Yes, of course. If anything becomes known about the baby's relatives, we will call you. But to tell you the truth, I would advise you to start searching on your own. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police." When Kate finally returned home, she found a frustrated Lyosha there. He had already returned from school and dejectedly showed his mother a diary in which there was an entry about his tardiness and that the homeroom teacher was calling her. "I'm sorry, Mom," the son said guiltily. "I had to get up myself in the morning." "No, I shouldn't have," Kate replied. "You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning. Not because it's supposed to be that way or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed on. So I owe you an apology." From their conversation, it might seem that no outsider girl was present in the apartment. Alex, although he squinted at her with some perplexity, tactfully did not ask any questions. Kate once again thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, in early childhood, unlike many, even from the same twins, was an absolutely trouble-free child. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kate set about preparing lunch. Then everyone sat down at the table. To the woman's surprise, Alex and Mary managed to become friends somehow and chatted animatedly about something of their own. And only after eating, when the girl was not around, the son approached her with an obvious question. "Mom, is Mary going to live with us now?" I asked her, "But she doesn't know. So far." "Yes, son," Kate replied. "The girl is lost, and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage. It's good that she stays," Alex suddenly concluded. "Why?" My mother was surprised. The younger ones like her son informed her seriously. "So now you and I are going to have something. Patting his hair, Kate laughed loudly and went about her usual household chores, washing, cleaning, cooking dinner for her husband's arrival. The woman preferred not to think about what would happen when he did return from work. However, the scandal that happened exceeded all her expectations. The husband shouted that they would not feed, as he put it, a street urchin, because the cost of children was already prohibitively high. "What do you know about expenses related to children?" Unexpectedly, even for herself, Kate flared up. "Have you ever bought them anything? Do you have any idea at least approximately what needs a child has?" She herself did not know what prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just that resentment had accumulated in my soul over the years, which now needed to be poured out somewhere. Her husband listened to her angry confession in an unusually quiet voice, not trying to interrupt or object. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kate talked and talked, expressing all that had accumulated in her soul, and about the fact that the money that he earns is not enough for a living, and about the fact that this could have been avoided if he had got a job right away, instead of sitting on her neck for several years. She even recalled to him the various excesses that he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies that he gave her in order to somehow feed and clothe the whole family. Of course, she talked not only about money, but also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she missed her former love and romance. Not only in not so many flowers and gifts, of course not. She would like simple human attention and at least a little warmth and participation instead of constant unfair reproaches. Well, Sergio said in a completely calm tone when Kate finally finished her monologue, "I understand that you will all be much better off without me than with me." This ominous phrase hung in the air. And the men, Without saying another word, took out a large suitcase from the closet in the room and began to pack their things into it. Kate, it would seem, should have seen this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loves him, persuading him not to make hasty decisions. And just 2 days ago she would have done so, but now she looked at what was happening with a composure that killed her. Sergio was going deliberately slowly and periodically glanced at Kate. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her and, most likely, wanted to scare the woman more than he really wanted to leave. If so, then his plan didn't work. And when the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat. Well, to hell with you, he angrily told his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kate stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved her hand and went to the nursery. There, Mary and Alex tried their best to calm the younger children, who were obviously scared by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The elders themselves were pale as chalk, but feeling their responsibility, they tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Dad not coming back anymore?" Alex finally asked. Kate noted that there was not a drop of regret or, on the contrary, joy in his voice. He didn't really care if Dad came back or not. He was just clarifying the information. Of course, this man, who rarely appeared at home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I do not know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back after a while, Doc." So the 5 of them began to live together, 4 children and Kate herself. And if at first she was afraid that without her husband's help she simply would not pull out such a horde of hungry mouths, then she soon discovered that this was not the case at all. On the contrary, life has become much easier and calmer without constant scandals and ridiculous demands. This is despite the fact that there was not much money for household expenses. Sergio allocated a very tiny amount from his salary, while Kate paid for the bulk of them from her benefits. However, the deadline was approaching when the first ones were supposed to end, and this was a bit of a problem. Kate understood that there was no way she could go full-time with 4 small children. But suddenly, with Sergio's departure, she had the strength and time to slowly start looking for options, at least part-time. And then several lucky cases helped her at once. First, the head mistress from the kindergarten called her, the queue for admission in which her children were waiting, without saying anything specific on the phone. She earnestly asked Kate to come to the institution as soon as possible for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began at the meeting. "As I understand it, you have been waiting for a very long time for your children to be able to enter our kindergarten. So long that one of them has already managed to go to school." Kate replied somewhat irritably. "I'll tell you a secret," the headmistress remarked. "By the time your turn comes, the younger ones will have time too. Many remain without a garden. Unfortunately, we have many more children than places. And don't look at me like that. I didn't make it up, and I can't change it." "And what is it? Did you call me just to tell me that we have no chance?" "On the contrary, I called you to propose a solution to this problem. You see, we had another babysitter in the nursery quit some time ago. No one stays long, you know, and I can't find a new one. The remaining staff is getting knocked off their feet and is about to run away too. So I thought it would be worth offering this job to someone who has been waiting in line for a long time. To be honest, there is a lot of work, but the salary is small, but we will be able to immediately accept your children into the age-appropriate group." "And why are you offering this to me?" Kate asked suspiciously. "I don't even have a pedagogical education. Surely there are more suitable candidates." "But you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, this is much more important in the work that you have to do. However, I will not hide the fact that we also made such an offer to the more suitable candidates, as you put it. However, none of them agreed to it. Then we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal. And you're not the first one I've called. Will that answer suit you?" Kate was satisfied with this answer. Now she had some kind of job that could be perfectly combined with taking care of younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend several hours in the apartment without her and heat their own lunch on their own. Moreover, the kindergarten was very close to both their school and home. Of course, they did not live very well, but not worse than before Sergio left. Life was starting to get better, and after a while, a second successful event occurred. This time, Kate was called by the same police officer on duty who a few weeks ago took her statement about what she found on Mary Street. "Is there any news about her parents?" Kate asked hopefully. "None, alas," the policeman replied. "As I told you, we are not very good at such things. Moreover, the data set about it is minimal. Have you tried looking for it yourself?" "Yes, somehow it was not up to that." The woman shrugged her shoulders. "You know, I have 3 of my own besides her. And recently my husband also left. So that." I see, the policeman sighed. "But in general, I called you on a very specific matter. You see, I finally managed to formalize Mary's stay with you. It means that now you can get her into school and all that." "Great," Kate beamed. The fact that Mary couldn't go to school really strained the woman a lot. So far, she had been studying with her on her own, but she understood that this issue would need to be resolved no later than the next school year begins. But summer was already rapidly approaching, and this meant that very soon the problem would become very acute. "Yes. In addition, you become the official guardian of the girl. This, of course, involves some payments. In addition, as I understand it, you will be able to claim certain benefits as a mother of many children." Everything turned out exactly as he said. Of course, there was always not enough money for something, but now, at least Kate could be sure that the children would be dressed, shod, fed, and placed in educational institutions. Contrary to her fears, life without Sergio did not collapse not only financially, but also emotionally. No matter how hard she tried, she could not feel any feelings about his departure. Something must have burned out in her at the very moment when her husband recklessly accused her of non-existent infidelity. This reaction surprised Kate very much. But for all that, I couldn't help but make her happy. With 4 children in her arms, the suffering of a collapsed love would be completely inappropriate. On the other hand, perhaps the children contributed to her peace of mind. With all her worries, she simply had no time to indulge in sadness and despair. So 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all family members, it was decided to conditionally divide the apartment into 2 halves, male and female. Mary and the younger Anne moved into Kate's room, where the adults used to live. Alyosha, with his brother Ted, stayed in his room. It was, of course, a little cramped, but so far it has not created any special problems. Mary and Alex's friendship grew stronger every day. They went to the same school now. However, the girl was a grade younger. The boy treated her like another little sister and took care of her in every possible way. She also has a great relationship with her younger children. In short, despite her unexpected appearance, she fit in perfectly with the family. Kate herself fell in love with the girl as her own daughter, and sometimes even forgot that this was not true. Mary, in turn, quickly got used to calling a woman mom, and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the girl was discovered was unanimously decided to consider her birthday. It seemed quite symbolic. After all, who knows what might have happened to Mary if she hadn't caught her eye in time. In a sense, it could be said that it was the terrible scene staged by Sergio that evening that saved the baby from a much sadder fate. And although Kate was glad that Mary was now her daughter, she couldn't figure out if no one was looking for the girl. On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for a found child, and all to no avail. The guards did not succeed in finding her parents either. Adding to the worry was the fact that the girl never got her real memories back. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course could not possibly be true. And Kate would really like to know how things really were. But the most diverse doctors in the budget polyclinic only spread their hands. They had never encountered such severe cases and had no idea what to do in such a situation. The only thing one of them could do was to give contacts to a good private clinic specializing in helping children who have lost their memory. But the family, of course, did not have the money for this. Mary herself. The lack of memories of the past didn't seem to bother him at all. She naively lived for today like a child and knew only that this day was good for her. And what was there before all this is not so important. Kate couldn't understand this either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some good way. At her age, she really wanted to find out who her parents were and for what reason they are no longer with her. And in the end, she brought the teacher with her questions so much that she took it and answered her honestly and directly. They were drunks, unnecessary and useless, like yourself. Then they died, and you fell on our head. Did you find out what you wanted? Are you happy? Now go clean the toilets. It's your turn today. Remembering this episode, Kate sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Mary had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman found her, she did not look at all like a child who was very unlucky in this life. Rather the opposite. And it often occurred to her that it might be much more comfortable and pleasant for a girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kate could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. And, in the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps, it was at this moment that she finally decided that the girl was now not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then the question arose of no longer just being her guardian, but fully adopting a child. And here she encountered a ridiculous and at the same time sad legal subtlety. While still in an official marriage, she could not do this without her husband's consent. It meant only one thing: it was necessary to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kate dialed Sergio's number. She absolutely did not want to talk to this man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the court. But such a process would have taken much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she had not had any contact for 2 years, would simply agree to peacefully file an application and go their separate ways, not only in fact, but also officially. Kate, Sergio's gentle voice came on the line. I'm so glad you finally called. You have no idea how much I've missed you. Kate was taken aback. On the one hand, something hurt and at the same time sweetly pecked at her heart. It was the tone he had used with her before all the horror that had happened to them. It's like she's back in those happy days. On the other hand, it sounded extremely inappropriate right now. I know that you miss me too, and in the end you will make the right decision. Sergio continued enthusiastically. You can't just leave your own husband because of some street girl. Aren't you calling to say that this problem is settled and I can come back? The whole patina of happy memories was gone. With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kate of the reason why, when he left, she was not even very upset about it, and responded to it in the coldest possible tone. Sergio, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce. So you found yourself a new man? His voice immediately lost all viscosity. Quickly, you won't say anything. I didn't find anyone. Anyway, it's none of your business. Exactly, since you left me alone with 4 children in my arms, as you said at the time, we have been able to live perfectly well without you. And now I would like to settle this last formality. I didn't leave you, her husband said indignantly. I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with this girl, and I wasn't able to carry another child, and I got out of your life until you solved this problem. Believe me, I have solved all my problems perfectly, except for one, about which I am calling you. Let's end this useless conversation. Sergio, neither I nor my children need you anymore. There was real fury in his voice now. In that case, file a lawsuit. I won't give you a divorce. I just advise you to think carefully before doing this. And for example, to remember that the apartment you and I acquired in marriage. This is a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who are not too eager to see me here. You know what I'm getting at. With that, he hung up the phone. Kate couldn't believe what she had heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? Moreover, is she threatening to deprive them of their only corner with the children if she decides to do so? Is this really the romantic and loving young man she once married? But she had nowhere to retreat. After several more attempts to peacefully negotiate with her husband, she realized that everything was useless. Either she gets rid of Mary and Sergio returns home, or a divorce through the court with the division of the apartment. He didn't want to hear about any other options. I understand that you still need time to come to your senses, he said in one such conversation, and I'm not in a hurry to make a decision. But since you deigned to talk to me, keep in mind I'm waiting for your decision. And even my patience is not unlimited. Kate herself did not want to delay all this, maintaining a kind of status quo. It was clear that this issue could not be suspended indefinitely. We need to solve it right now. After all, Mary's official adoption is also a kind of formality, just like this divorce. It's true. But what if, for example, she wants to remarry? In the end, Kate finally decided and filed a lawsuit. Before that, she did one single thing. She tried to explain to the children in terms that they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before. And at least for some time, they will all have to live in a one-room apartment. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to such a decision. Sergio kept his word and really tried to sue the part of the apartment due to him. However, unexpectedly for everyone, the court refused him this requirement. The judge referred to the fact that all their children live in this apartment with their mother. Besides, there is also the only place of residence of another child, so it is impossible to share the apartment in any way, except in the event that an unlucky father takes some of the children to his upbringing. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The guys were still too young to have their opinions and wishes taken into account by the court. Therefore, at this moment, everything depended on Sergio's response. For several minutes, he looked triumphantly at his ex-wife. She understood that he did not need children, but in order to shake his nerves, he might agree to this proposal. And then they will have many more months of new lawsuits, the fight for the children, which he of course will lose. But all this will take Kate's time and money, not to mention millions of nerve cells. However, the husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems either. And he agreed that the children should stay with their mother, but in this case, he should be compensated in the amount of the market value of his half of the apartment. The court agreed with this. Nevertheless, given the small incomes of Kate and Ted and her dependents, she had to pay this money in small amounts over the years. Not that such a decision would satisfy any of the parties. Nevertheless, it turned out to be the only possible compromise. In the Kate family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, no matter how she prepared them, turned out to be scared of the lawsuit, and especially the prospect that they would be separated and forced to live with their father, whom the younger ones did not even remember. And now that it was all over, the guys were jubilant. In addition, being an absolutely free woman and Mary's longtime guardian, Kate, although not without difficulty, was able to achieve the official adoption of the girl. This was the reason for a big celebration, by their standards. His indispensable attributes were to be an inexpensive but delicious cake from the store, as well as a trip to the amusement park. None of the children had ever been to such a place in their lives, but of course each of them dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman squeezed all the expenses she could, just to save money for this trip and arrange real entertainment for her children. And so, a significant day has come. The guys looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, there was no question of trying everything at once, and fortunately, even the little ones understood these limitations perfectly. Only Mary, usually noisy and cheerful, behaved in an unusually quiet way. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a completely different kind of surprise than everyone else's. Mary paid very little attention to the rides themselves. She seemed to know them well. "Mary, are you all right?" Kate asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, everything is fine," she replied in a low and colorless voice. This amazed the woman even more. The child's intonation was radically at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely unusual for Mary. Open and trusting, she is not used to hiding her emotions. That's why her attempt to do this turned out to be an absolute failure and alarmed her foster mother even more. However, Kate did not continue this dialogue. She knew perfectly well that if Mary had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned, she would only achieve that the girl would withdraw even more into herself. Otherwise, there is a good chance that she herself would want to share her experiences. And so it happened. Kate's own children, completely mesmerized by the surrounding environment, did not notice anything around them and enthusiastically argued about which attraction should be tried first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went to the Ferris wheel. Mary unexpectedly refused to go with them, citing a fear of heights. No one tried to dissuade her. He and Kate sat down on a bench, from which it was clearly visible that wheel booth, in which the others sat down all along its route. There was an awkward silence for a while. Then the girl interrupted him with a phrase that her foster parent expected to hear the least. "Mom, don't be mad at me," she began and stopped in mid-sentence, trying to see Kate's reaction in her eyes. "Have I ever been angry with you?" she replied in surprise. "No," Mary said, embarrassed. "Well, you can now." "Why? Honey, what happened?" "You see, since we came to this park, I have a feeling that I know it, as if I had been here before. Maybe it was true." Kate felt a joyful anticipation. Are the memories starting to come back to the girl? Could it be that her real parents really took her to this particular park, or just to a similar one, and now the environment helps her restore her memory? Why should I be angry about that? What's wrong with that? After all, we will find out exactly what happened to you. Maybe we can even find these people and let them know that you're okay. But then they'll probably want to take me away," Mary exclaimed, almost in horror. "It's not going to be that easy," Kate tried to reassure her. "You're going to be 9 years old soon, maybe more. Unfortunately, we don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself recently that a trial is not a quick matter. And there is no way to do without him here. Well, as soon as you turn 10, you can decide for yourself which family you want to live in. And besides, maybe you'll like your own parents more than me." "Well, no," Mary pouted. "How can you know that?" "They abandoned me." The girl responded with childishness. "Maybe they didn't abandon it, but just lost it and still can't find it. Anyway, I've already got used to you, and to my brothers, and to my sister. I've been trying very hard not to remember anything for a long time." So that, Mary couldn't find the right words further. Well, Kate already understood her perfectly in order not to face this impossible choice. After all, she probably loved her real parents too, and if she remembers them, the feelings may return. But the new family has already become almost native to her. "Listen," Kate said as gently as she could. "It seems to you now that there are only 2 options, but in fact there are many more. If it so happens that we find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You will be able to visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often. I'm sure. Whoever these people are, they love you, and realizing that it's better for you, they won't stop it." Mary rolled her eyes. It didn't seem to have occurred to her at all. But now her thoughts were flowing in that direction. And the girl calmed down a little, realizing that everything was not as hopeless as she had imagined. Unfortunately, Kate couldn't say the same about herself. She was not at all sure of the validity of her own soothing words. It is not known how long this conversation would have continued and what it would have led to in the end if it had not been interrupted in a rather unceremonious way. A man dressed in the uniform of an amusement park employee approached them. He had a broom in his hand, and he didn't look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. "Hello, I'm sorry, but the fact is that your daughter seemed very familiar to me. Is this Veronica by any chance?" Hearing this name, the girl started up. From the outside, she looked like a lost dog who heard her nickname in a casual conversation with strangers. She began to stare intently at the janitor, as if to remember if she had ever met him before. "You see, what's the matter?" Kate answered, carefully choosing her words. "We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that this is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She wandered down the street at a very young age, did not remember anything at all about her past, and unfortunately, does not remember to this day. If you really know her." 3 years ago. The janitor exclaimed, stunned. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but that was the last time I saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is striking." "Tell me everything from the beginning," Kate suggested. While the janitor was sighing and gathering his thoughts, the children returned, which seemed to be on the Ferris wheel. However, Alex realized from just one look from his mother that something serious was going on, and it was clearly not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger ones to some kind of carousel, and then carefully led them to a new attraction. "You see, they used to come here a lot, the Smith family. But I later found out that their names were father, mother, and a little girl," the janitor finally began. "They came here almost every week and then disappeared. But I didn't think much of it at the time. You never know, maybe they found another park that they liked better, or something else. Then all sorts of entertaining things just started to grow all over the city, like mushrooms after the rain. And then what? Mary asked, listening to him as if spellbound. And then I saw an ad in the newspaper that this girl was missing. Her parents offered a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found it. And you don't have, I don't know, a copy of this newspaper left? Kate asked with a mixture of fear and hope. There's no newspaper left, the janitor replied. But if you are interested in the contacts of these people, then I have saved them just in case I see or hear something. After digging a little in his pocket, he took out an old push-button phone, found the right number and dictated it to Kate. It would be nice if you turned out to be Veronica, he said to Masha finally. As far as I could see, your parents love you very much, Dot. Everyone returned home in a strange, agitated state. It is possible that the solution to the mystery was right in their hands, but none of them knew what her disclosure would lead to. The astute Alex, of course, noticed that something was wrong, but did not ask unnecessary questions. On the contrary, he diligently distracted the attention of Tanya and Ted so that they would not bother him once again. Kate spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, then dialing the cherished number, then quickly resetting it until the call had time to go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. She just had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she still took this decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few rings, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, Kate said, then exhaled sharply and continued. My name is Katrina. I'm calling about your daughter, who disappeared about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutral, friendly tone of the interlocutor immediately changed. The man was obviously startled by what he had heard and had absolutely no idea how to react to it. Whether to be happy, indignant, or scared, what information could this unknown woman have given him? You see, what's the matter? There is some possibility that she was under my care all this time, and she was recently adopted by me. I can't say for sure, because the girl had lost her memory for some reason and had no idea about her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up for nothing, but a few days ago, it was as if the janitor from the amusement park recognized her. I think you and I need to meet and discuss everything, the man replied hoarsely. You're right, but I would prefer that the first meeting took place without the participation of the girl. Why bother her and you unnecessarily? I agree, he replied. It had only been a few hours when Kate, terribly worried, went into one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. Perhaps he was 10 years older than herself, which did not affect his beauty in any way. Even in such an environment, the woman could not help but notice that he looked just great. Hello again, she said, sitting down opposite him. He nodded silently. Either he didn't want to say anything, or he just couldn't. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and, putting it on the table, carefully pushed it towards his interlocutor. She, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Mary. Opening the folder, Kate found that the stranger had the same idea as she had. He brought several pictures of his daughter, taken, apparently, shortly before her disappearance, in that very amusement park. In one of the photos, she posed in a pink dress that she was wearing the night the woman found her on the street. There could be no doubt it was Mary who was depicted in the images. Kate didn't have any photos of the girl dating back to the same period, only the most recent pictures taken with a recently purchased cheap camera, bought by hand on one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man obviously unmistakably recognized his daughter. It's Veronica. My God, she's alive. And, as far as I know, she is absolutely healthy, except for memory loss. I'm afraid, however, that I had no way to ensure the standard of living to which she was accustomed. But the alternative was an orphanage. And I found that even my modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts is better than this. The man relapsed into silence. Kate didn't rush him. She understood roughly what kind of storm was going on in this man's soul. Finally, she settled down a little bit, and he was able to somehow put words into sentences. The first thing he said sounded very unexpected. "I still haven't introduced myself. I'm George." "It's a pleasure," Kate replied magically. He stammered. "I'm sorry. I'm in a bit of shock right now. But anyway, I have to thank you for taking my girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite a long time, but apparently they somehow broke up with you." She began cautiously. "As I understand it, you mostly advertised in newspapers, and I posted them on the internet." "But I didn't even think about the internet," George sighed, and no one suggested it. "Although I've always been told that I'm too old-fashioned, especially for my age." "Have you reported it to the police?" "I did, of course," he sighed, "but they couldn't find anything." "It's strange, because the first thing I did was go to the police. However, her employee told me back then that they were unlikely to be able to do anything. I didn't know her name, though, and it probably needs them to check through their channels. By the way, about this. You said she lost her memory." "Unfortunately, yes, I took her to the doctors, but they couldn't do anything either. However, when we were in that very park, she seemed to begin to vaguely recognize this place. Maybe if she sees you, she'll have other memories too." "I would like to believe it," George replied with another heavy sigh. "But you see, there is another problem." "What do you mean?" "You see, the girl lived in our family like a native. She became very attached to me, and perhaps even more importantly, to my children. And I, sorry for the abruptness, will insist that they continue to communicate. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in." "You're not rich at all, are you?" George suddenly clarified. "I'm not going to be ashamed of this, and I can assure you that Veronica gets everything she needs for life." "That's not what I'm getting at," he said. "It's just that I think I have a proposal for you that will suit all parties. Unless, of course, you hold on to your job too much." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "You see, I am a single, very busy man, and I am not at all sure that I will be able to devote proper TED time to my child. You see, after all that happened, I threw myself into my work. I have a big mansion in the suburbs. Move in with me with the children. You will be a babysitter with accommodation. Don't worry about school. You will be able to send children there with a personal driver. By the way, we have an elite institution very close by. I think we can put not only Veronica there, but also her new brothers or sisters. You said you have several children of your own." 3, Kate confirmed, "and 2 of them are supposed to go to school this year." "So you agree?" "It's a very tempting offer," Kate replied thoughtfully. "There's just one thing I don't understand. That janitor in the park said that the 3 of you always came there. Where is your wife?" George lowered his eyes to the table, but Kate managed to notice how tears flashed treacherously in them. It was only now that she realized how stupid and tactless her question had been. They've lost a child. Perhaps they thought that the girl was no longer alive. You never know what could have happened to the mother under such circumstances. "You see," said George, having quickly mastered his emotions, "Veronica was a late child, very long awaited and beloved. My wife and I wanted a big family, but for a long time nothing worked out, and finally our daughter appeared. The doctors said that Natasha's body simply could not stand the second birth. And then our only daughter disappeared, and now I found it. My poor wife has not lived to see this moment for only a few months. She got sick right after Veronica went missing, and now she's gone." "I'm sorry," Kate said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass in front of him. They sat in awkward silence for several painful minutes, and then, wanting to turn the topic of conversation to something less painful, they began to discuss the details of Mary Veronica's move and meeting with her own father. As a result, Kate returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children perceived moving to a huge mansion as a magical adventure. Even Alex, always restrained and serious beyond his years, almost jumped for joy. Mary alone showed no signs of happiness. She still did not remember her father and decided to meet with him. In addition, she was visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. "I don't remember her now," She told Kate, "I'm not even sad. But if I remember, I'll probably be very upset. That's why I chose to tell you about it now, so that you'll be ready when you remember," the woman replied. It took another 2 weeks before the family was fully ready to move. And finally, the day came when Mary Veronica was supposed to meet her own dad. All participants and witnesses of this event, except perhaps small children, were terribly worried. Even Lyosha was noticeably worried about his sister. George organized the transportation of things. He sent his personal driver for the family. All the way the girl sat on pins and needles, spinning, bouncing, and couldn't concentrate on anything. However, when they left the city, she suddenly froze, looking out the window, as if she recognized the scenery flying by outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she screamed loudly. George was no less worried than his daughter and was waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl came out of the Maguna and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father leaned forward, but hesitated and eventually remained in place, only starting to nervously move from foot to foot. She came up to him herself and said in a semi-interrogative tone, "Dad, Veronica, my daughter, do you remember me?" It was obvious that he was restraining his desire to hug the child so as not to scare her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than some unknown uncle to her right now, even if she was informed that he was her father. But most likely, she does not remember and does not feel it. It's like I'm remembering something, but not. Maybe I made it up at all. Unable to withstand the intensity of emotions, she burst into tears. The guys immediately ran up to her to hug her tightly. "Nothing," her foster mother said. "It's okay, daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed rather to George. However, he did not think to take any action, realizing what a difficult situation they were all in. Turning abruptly, he entered the house, motioning for the new residents to follow him. The family had already lived in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory did not even think about recovering. Periodically, she seemed to recall some fragments, but she herself could not understand whether it was true or a figment of her imagination. Finally, after consulting, George and Kate decided that it was time for them to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card of a private clinic that was once left to her by one of the doctors of the city hospital. George could afford to pay for the services of her specialists, and the girl began to visit this institution regularly. "Do not expect an immediate result from us," one of the doctors warned them. "It may take many months or even years to restore memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a dramatic memory. Do you think she suffered some kind of injury?" George asked worriedly. "I mean a psychological injury," the doctor explained. "Our examination did not reveal any physical damage, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she has already decided that she will never return home. If you want, a kind of defense mechanism has worked, and now we have to convince her brain that it no longer needs IT. That evening, after putting the children to bed, Kate knocked on George's room. He was sitting at his desk and writing something in a thick notebook. "Do you need something?" "What is it?" he asked politely. "George, I wanted to ask you, but I still couldn't decide. Tell me, how did Veronica disappear?" "Call her by her usual name, if you like. She doesn't respond to Veronica anyway, and it's not a fact that it will ever be. And as for the circumstances of her disappearance, in fact, I know practically nothing. That evening, my wife and I put her to bed, and in the morning she was gone. We searched the house and the surrounding area, but found nothing. We didn't have surveillance cameras or on the road at that time, but we didn't find any traces of strangers in the house. It was as if she had left on her own accord. But as far as I understand, she had no reason to do that?" "Not as far as I know," George replied. 6 months of treatment in the clinic have passed, and it finally gave the first results, and the most joyful for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It turned out early in the morning, when a satisfied Mary Veronica ran down the stairs to the living room, where George was having breakfast, and took him in her arms. This, of course, did not in any way negate her love and affection for her new family. It was only now that she was really glad that they all lived in the same spacious house. Since then, she has responded to both of her names. And when it came time for her to get a passport, she insisted that both of them were registered there. From that day on, her memory began to gradually return to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, her mother, and the neighborhood children with whom she loved to play. By the age of 14, she already remembered literally everything, except one thing: what exactly happened on the day she disappeared, and how did she manage to end up on the other side of the city. It was only 2 more years later that these memories began to return to her. Not immediately, very smoothly. At first, in the form of some vague images that came mostly in a dream, but gradually they became clearer and clearer, until finally they formed into one complete picture. And that's when she finally managed to tell her parents everything. The solution turned out to be ridiculously simple and banal. "I went to get the kitten," she said. "What kind of kitten?" Kate was surprised. "So white, so beautiful. He was walking in our yard, and I couldn't sleep, and I was looking at him from the window. And then he left the yard, and I wondered where exactly. I climbed out of the window. My room was on the ground floor then, and I went to get him. I thought it wasn't far, just one peek. I came out of the yard, and he was gone. I went one way, the other. I tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. Apparently, he ran away somewhere on his cat business. Or maybe he was at home at all, just walking and went to his house. Actually, I was going to too, when I realized that I wouldn't find the cat anyway." "So you just got lost?" George was surprised. "Well, yes, it turns out that way. And apparently, trying to return, she began to walk further and further away from home. I reached the city in the morning. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I decided I could take the bus. I've seen them walking around here." And she went, of course, in the wrong direction. And the bus, to tell the truth, was most likely the wrong one. So I wandered around the city for several days, and I got to the other end of it. As I understand it, it never occurred to anyone to look for me there. I haven't slept all this time, I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't stand it, and I fell asleep right on a park bench. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. She went wherever she wanted. And then my mom met me. That's actually the whole story. Around the same time, when the girls' memories returned, George and Kate decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a lot of common interests. And her own children had long perceived her new husband as their father. He responded in kind. Kate fulfilled her childhood dream. She entered the institute again at the Faculty of Economics and graduated with a red diploma. After that, her husband was happy to hire her at his company. The woman sold her second apartment, having fully paid Sergio for his half of this living space. So they lived as a big friendly family in a huge mansion, which now became their common home. In memory of her adventures, the girl dragged a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment. The parents grumbled for a long time about this reckless act of their daughter, but they left the cat. Very soon he became everyone's favorite in the house.